So welcome back to the James Wingfield Racing channel. Here we are, I've got another video for you tonight. So slightly different topic again, and this time it's a bit more of a tutorial style video. I'm going to try and help answer some of the questions. Loads of people always ask the same sort of questions of how do you prepare for a new track. I guess my view on that, my answer to that would be there is no real right and wrong way to do it. Everybody has a different style, and ultimately whatever works for you is fine. That said, I do think there are some things that you can use to help and to kind of condense the time that it takes you to learn a track. So what I was going to do is run through an example of how I do it. This coming week I'm planning to race in a couple of the Radical races on iRacing. It's a car that, if you've watched any of our JWR race nights, you'll know that we used it there. Last weekend we used it in Laguna Seca. We had a night race, which was great fun. And the one before we used it as well. It's a bit of a stable car for us. We quite like it, so we'll keep using it in the JWR nights. So in terms of the car itself, I have used it a little bit. Not very much, not in any properly competitive series. I think when I first got iRacing, I graduated out of the Mazdas and did 1 or 2 races in the Radical, but that would have been well over a year ago now. And I've never actually raced in it since then in anything other than a hosted JWR fun night. So for me, the car feels a little bit natural, but I've still got a lot to learn. In terms of the track I'm going to be showing you tonight is Sebring International. The track itself I have raced at in the last season, I think it was, in Formula Renault. So I did the Formula Renault 2.0 actually 2 seasons ago. I was in Division 3. I managed to win that division, and this was one of the circuits that I actually took a top split win at. So the track itself I'm fairly happy with. I do quite like it. Lots of people find it really bumpy. It is bumpy. Lots of people get a bit upset by that, but I'm quite happy with it. So the track I'm okay with. The car I'm reasonably okay with, but I've never tried the two together. So for me this will be a bit of an explore into the unknown. But as I say, I'll show you how I do it and give you a few explanations of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, just to hopefully help you out. If you agree or disagree, but please let me know. Put comments in the video or ping me messages on social media. I'm happy to have some discussions, and I'm more than accepting that we can all learn something from this, including me. So we'll see how it goes.
James Wingfield steals it!
So here we are, we're in the car now. Just loading up the setup. So the first thing you want to do when you get into a car like this is you're going to load the setup that you want to do your practice on. I'd recommend to use the same setup that you're going to race on. If it's particularly aggressive and maybe you keep losing the back end, it could be worth dropping back to a slightly safer setup whilst you're first learning the car. But it's definitely best to try and load the race setup first. And we're going to jump in and go and drive out on track. So I'm going to play this in double speed just because there's quite a lot of driving to get through, and as I'm learning the track there's not a huge amount to learn from my racing lines or anything like that. So as I say, this is double speed, but we've got the right setup loaded. In this case the Radical Championship is actually run as a fixed setup series, so that means on iRacing everybody has the same setup, you can't change it, everyone's on a level playing field. There are different championships which have open setups and some which have fixed setups. And there's pluses and minuses to both. It's often nice to tune the setup to your own style, and if you're good at setup you can actually steal a bit of an advantage by getting a really good car setup. But it's something that's an extra confusion to starting out. So when you're learning new tracks, when you're new to iRacing, it's always nice to get into a fixed setup series like this one. The MX-5s is the first series that you do, and that's fixed setup. The Radical, I think it's a C licence, it's a little bit higher licence requirement, so after a few races in the MX-5s you can qualify through to something a bit like this, and I'd recommend it. It's a great car, good fun championship to do. So we are just putting some laps in. There's kind of 2 ways to take this first session. Really the target is to just get a representative lap, so I want to go and do a few laps, learn where the corners are, how they join together in this particular car. As I said before, I do know the track already and I know the car a little bit, so putting the two together isn't a completely new thing for me. So the target is to get a representative lap, which means I don't need to go all guns blaring right at the beginning. I can start by braking really early, so I know my Formula Renault braking points, and
quite quickly in this car I found that actually they're similar braking points. It's not drastically different from that car. So what I've done here is I've sort of started by braking about 100 yards, 100 metres earlier, and each corner I get to, I'll brake a bit later on the following lap. There's sort of two ways of approaching it. There's either the brake early and every lap push it on a bit more, or you can go out and try and set really fast laps in the beginning but crash quite a lot in doing so. Different people like different approaches. I would recommend the slower approach probably, because it means that you're on track more, and also in iRacing in particular the tyres really do warm up over the first few laps. So if you're only going out and pushing really hard for half a lap and crashing, you come back out of the pits on cold tyres again, so you kind of end up only ever driving on cold tyres, and that's not great practice for you. You need to learn how to drive it on obviously the race representative warm tyres. So I would say best bet is to go out and brake a bit early. So you'll brake a bit too early into the corner and you'll just coast around the corner and you'll accelerate a bit too late. It's important if you do that though to brake fully. Don't just brake gently all the way to the corner, all the way to the apex, because you know you can. It's better to brake hard and then just come up short, and you can then detect that actually I'm 50 yards too short or I'm 100 yards too short, so I know how much I can move my braking point on for the next lap. So that's kind of the approach I've done here, and I've got, as a result, you can see the optimal lap times are generally going pink, or going purple, sorry, which means that they're my quickest ever. The number at the top of the screen is green when I'm going quicker than my best ever sector, and it's red when I'm going slower than my best ever sector. So again, you want to try and keep all of those green all the way through, because I'm just gaining almost every corner at the moment. And I've probably done a few laps there. So as we come into this last corner of the lap, I'm going to slow it down to full speed, and I'm just going to talk you through what I'm doing on one lap. There we go.
You've just done a
So
156.
we're coming down into turn 1,
Sector
fast,
3 is
flat, not quite flat
0.8
out, it's
of your
fast corner,
best.
down 2 gears, and it's very much about keeping apex speed here. So I've done that, and I've come out just inside the curb. I'm not using all the curb yet, I'll do that in future laps. And again, I've managed to get my braking point a bit later now, so I'm starting to get some fairly representative corner exits. I'm sure I can go a lot quicker with a bit more practice later on, but this is really about putting a track map together so that I can then come out and have a think about it and work out which corners are the most important ones to focus on. As we come down here, big stop into the hairpin, get it turned and then power
Sector
on
one
again.
time's okay.
You can see up above at the top of the screen it's a green sector time, so I am still going quicker than I've been before, which is good to see. Because I'm going quicker than I have before, you can't see the reference car, but there is actually a reference car turned on, so at the times that it does overtake me, you might see a ghost car just come past me or come through me sometimes, and that's where I'm going a bit slower than I have before, which obviously does happen at times. And once you're up to speed, it will happen a lot more. You'll end up kind of almost chasing your own ghost car to try and optimise your performance. So we're coming around here. This is an interesting complex here. The right, left, and then a tight right onto the back straight. So I missed the apex a little bit there and ran a bit wide, dropped just onto the grass. So you see I picked up a 1x there.
this lap, track limits.
As a result of that, it's not going to count this lap for me in my fastest lap times. You can see the ghost car there has just come through. It's because I had a slightly slow exit onto that straight. And then a very wide and bumpy last corner. There's a lot of different lines I think you can take there. It's going to take a bit of dialing in. You can see a decent corner on that lap though. It's gone fairly quick, so I've ended up with a 55.6. That's a pretty decent lap, so let's jump out of the car and go and have a look at what it looks like in the data. So I've done 3 or 4 laps in that session. That went quite well actually. I was quite pleased with that. In those 4 laps I managed to stay pretty much clean all the way through. The lap times came down, and there's loads more time still to come out I'm sure, but that means I've got the sort of shape of the racetrack about right, and if I look at a data lap of it I should have the right kind of speed trace overall. So the next step really would be to have a look at that data and to understand which corners I should be focusing on. If I'm honest, probably I would normally do this step in my head and I wouldn't actually come out of the car and go and look at the actual data. Usually if I was just practicing on my own I would do this mentally,
and just keep driving for a bit longer, maybe put half an hour or even an hour into driving in the first go, because I find that I can get my own lap times down, and I can kind of review what I need to do whilst I'm driving or between sessions. But what I wanted to do on this video is to jump back out of the car, pull up the data that I use, and show you guys how what mental thought process I'm going through. And it's a bit easier to explain if I can demonstrate it, so you don't have to visualize. So what you've got on the screen here, you can see this is the session that I was just doing. I use VRS, the Virtual Racing School. There are other ways of doing this. You can do it in something like Motec or in Atlas. Personally, I quite like the front end of VRS, so I have got another video I was looking at of data analysis specifically, so I won't go into too much detail on all of that yet, but check out the other videos as and when they come up. This time around I just want a very high level explanation of what I'm looking for when I'm learning a new track. So if we pick, the comparison is going to be, I'll use my fastest lap, which that last lap there you saw I did drop a wheel onto the grass, so it gave me a 1x, which is why it's not detecting it as the quickest, but it does show still. So the 1:55.6. Don't really need to compare it to anything, but for the sake of this I'll compare it to lap 3. So there we go. If I jump into the main screen, click on the full track, so this should pull up an overall lap sort of track map. There we go. So that is the lap that I've just driven, Sebring International, and from here really the focus for me is how do I get quicker in the fastest way, so in the shortest period of time to get from whatever lap I just did, a 1:55.6 was it, to my ultimate lap time, whatever that is, be it a 1:54 or 1:52, or it could be anything at this point. I don't really know, don't have a good feel for that yet. If we look across the top, this is going to tell us there are 17 turns on this track. So every time I go out for another session, the way I would try to work it is that gives me 17 different things that I can be working on in one lap. So if I can consider turn 1 to be completely different to turn 2, and when I go into turn 1 for the first time I'll do something, and when I go into turn 1 for the next lap I'll be able to improve on what I did the lap before. And you can do that for each corner individually, almost. I mean, in this case you can see there are some chicanes and some sets of corners that all work as one, but the idea is that you can build on each set of corners at least in the same session. It takes a lot of mental capacity to do 17 of those and to remember all of that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this quick analysis to see which ones I really need to focus on. And the golden rule here is look for the longest straight and focus on the corner before it. So that's what we'll do. This is a slightly unusual track because actually if you look, the cursor here is on the start line. So we've got a start straight here which is reasonably long, into a fast turn 1. Not much of a straight afterwards, so actually although turn 1 is quite a big brave corner, the time you make through it you only make in that corner, you don't really multiply it down the next straight. You've got 2, 3, 4, which is a bit of a complex. Then you've got a fairly decent straight after that, so that exit of turn 4 is important. Then we've got this hairpin, I'm assuming that's 5, it probably calls this one 5 actually, but you've got the hairpin over here, exit of that again quite important because we've got a decent straight. A couple of corners up the top here, and then another decent straight down the back, so this corner up here is going to be important. A bit of a complex. This is probably the longest straight we're coming into, and it's quite a tricky right hander on the way in as well, so I'd say that's the key corner for this track at the moment. Long back straight, big fast sweeping final corner, and that leads into our opening start straight again. So again, quite an important one, because it gives you a good run onto the next lap as well as finishing the lap you're on. So in terms of which corners to focus on, I'd say this one down here is probably key. Up here, this one would be maybe number 2. That hairpin, we need a good exit out of there, and then probably the exit out of turn 4 here. And those are kind of the 1, 2, 3, 4 main focuses, and then if we've got some mental capacity spare, then look at the final corner, because I think that long sweeping corner there's a lot of time to be made, and turn 1 is a similar thing where you can make good time through the corner, but you're not really going to gain much afterwards. So let's focus on the other ones first, and these two if we can. There's obviously a lot more information on the screen as well, and actually one of the advantages, one of the good things about this software is you can really go in and analyse it corner by corner, which is something I'll definitely do and definitely run through with you. It's probably a bit too early to do that just on those 4 laps. Like I say, there's going to be so much improvement in my own driving just by doing a few more laps that it's a little bit of a waste to get into that now. So I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to jump back in the sim. We'll do a few more laps and try and kind of consolidate on the racing line in those corners as far as I can feel it in the car, and we'll focus on those 4 or 5 corners that I pointed out, and then once I've got a more consistent and a lap time that's closer to my ultimate, once those times start to come down and sort of level out at whatever my limitation is in that session, that's when I'll jump back out of it and we'll come back into the data and start to go into some of the detail that we need to unlock the next level of speed. So yeah, let's jump back in. So I've done a couple of hours of practice now. I think I've done about 1 or 2 hours in the car, and I've managed to bring my lap times down quite nicely. So I was at, what was it, a 156.8 or 155.8 maybe before, and by doing what we said earlier, focusing on those, primarily on those 4 corners that were onto the long straights, I've managed to bring that down. On the screen it's saying now 54.8. I got that down to 54.4 in another lap as well. So it's, yeah, I was quite happy with that progression. Still more to come, and there will be other people out on the internet who've got much quicker laps if you keep looking. So I'm not sort of professing to be the quickest in this car. After a couple of hours, that'd be crazy. But I have showed how I've learnt the track, and I've really got my times down to something respectable, and I should be able to go racing at that speed. So what I wanted to show you here was how I've managed to do that. And when I said I focused on these corners, what exactly did I do? How did I turn that into lap time? And fundamentally it's by doing, as I said in the video, everything I can to get the best possible corner exit onto that long straight, and that's what we can show you. There's a couple of ways of doing that. I can look at data, and I can also look at reference car comparison. This time round in my quick lap I've slowed down a lot earlier, and the reference car has gone past me into the corner really quickly, and then on the way out the corner it's been slow, and I've just gained all of that speed back again. So it's just coming up after this left-hander. And you'll see that I position myself slightly to the left of the reference car, and as I hit the brakes I slow down more. The car's gone much quicker into the corner, the reference car has, but on the exit it's slowed down because my apex speed was too late in the corner. And then all the way down this straight you can see that the timing at the top of the screen, I'm 2/10 up all the way down that straight, which was really nice to see, and that's a really clear example of how the slow in, fast out kind of terminology really works. The same here through that corner onto the long back straight. Not quite such a good example there, but you can see that I did still get a much cleaner exit, and there's another quarter of a second. So just in those 2 corners I've gained nearly half a second, and that just goes to show kind of how you can get quite big lap time gains in just a couple of corners. So we saw how that looked from the onboard position. So I was driving the quick lap against my own reference car, which was the slower lap with going in too quickly and coming out too slowly. And I've got the same thing showing up here on data, which is quite a nice comparison. So if we look here into turns 12 and 13, turns 12 is just this flat out kink really, but I've positioned the car further to the left. And the reason I've done that, although it's slightly wider and therefore slower around that corner, it's given me a straighter line to brake the car down. So I've managed to do my braking in a straighter line, brake harder and squarer, keep the car under control, and then turn the car a bit later. So that's given me this nice straight braking here, and you can see the blue line is actually a bit wider than the red dashed line, which is my earlier quicker entry lap. So what I've done in that one, I turned in a bit soon, carried the speed into the corner, and you can see that very clearly in this speed trace over here. The dotted red line is showing a lot more speed all the way into the corner, but as a result of that I've driven kind of part way through the corner before I've slowed the car, and then I've started accelerating from this point here. So you can see I'm kind of pretty much at the corner exit. The arrow here is pretty much at the corner exit by the time I've managed to pick up the throttle. I've managed to get nice and aggressively on the throttle. I've gone straight from minimum to full throttle basically, which is usually a sign that you've done it all a bit too late and you've kind of pushed into the corner a bit too late. Whereas on the quicker lap, the blue lap, you see up here my minimum speed point is so much earlier.
it's really on the entry to the corner still. So I've managed to get the car slowed down and turned, and then I've driven all the way through. So from that point on, I'm accelerating, and although I've given up speed on the way into the corner, you can see this line is the delta time is dropping in this curve, which is saying that I've actually lost 0.4 of a second through that early part of the corner, and that's how much I gained by going in too quick. But then on the exit of the corner, I've gained about 0.5 of a second just in this window that we're looking at. So having lost out on the way in, I've gained more than that on the way out, and because I've now ended up at the exit of this corner travelling, what's that? That's about 12 kilometers an hour quicker. Then as we go down the straight, I've carried that advantage all the way down. So although I was 0.5 tenth up in the corner, I've now gained another 1.5 tenths all the way down the next straight, because here you can see that my speed is just higher all the way along. Of course they converge together because that's what happens, we sort of converge to an ultimate maximum speed, so the benefit decays away down the length of the straight, but it's still there. So that change was worth 0.2 of a second just in that one example there. And then there's another nice bit here in turns 15 to 16 that we can show you. So the first right-hander, I've actually managed to carry a bit more speed in. I can't really claim that's a line change or anything like that. I think really that's just gaining confidence. I've just carried a bit more speed in, pretty much on the same line, kind of doing the same thing with the car, so that's just gaining confidence and getting used to the car and the track. So that's good. And then through the left-hander here, there is a bit of a difference. If we come down here, actually, I might be able to zoom in and show the line difference a bit better. There we go. You can see, it doesn't matter so much which way it's pointing, but through this left-hander, the dotted red line, I've let the car run slightly wider. So I've carried more speed. If you look at the speed trace, the red line is higher through that left-hander. So I was quicker through the left-hander in that red car. But as a result of running further to the right, it's put me in a more difficult place to get that right-hander onto the straight. And that means that I've actually slowed down a bit more through the right-hander, and I've come out onto the straight actually a bit too wide. You saw at the time I actually dropped a wheel or two onto the grass. So that means that when you look down here at my throttle trace, not only have I come out a bit slower, I've had to do a reasonably big lift of the throttle on the exit of the corner, so that's cost me even more speed down the straight. So by, in this instance, sacrificing a bit of speed through that left-hander, I've positioned myself better to get a nice wide line through the right-hander and carry all of the speed I can onto that straight. And it's a similar story really. Through this sector that we're looking at on the screen, I've gained 0.3 of a second, and then all the way down the next straight I've gained another near enough 1.5 tenths. So that's another pretty much half a second. So just in those kind of two complexes of corners, I've gained about 7 or 8 tenths of a second. So you can really see how this time comes to you if you focus on the right corners. And in this case, I gave up speed in some places. In fact, both of those cases, I gave up speed on the corner before in order to get the critical corner absolutely bang on to get the sweetest exit I could. So that's quite a nice example there. So I thought I'd show you that. So hopefully that's a fairly good example there, and a couple of detailed worked examples of specific corners of how you can kind of learn a track and what to focus on when you are learning a track. When you're preparing for a race, there's always a few other things to remember though. So I think most of your time should go into dedicating practice towards hot lapping, which is kind of what this has been. But before you get into an actual race, there's always a few other things to remember. So how to launch the car. It's so easy to get all this way through practice, and then it's not until the lights go green on your first lap and you suddenly realise I don't really know how to launch this car. So make sure you always do some practice starts. Very easy to do. You can do it anywhere around a lap basically. So just stop the car, put your foot on the throttle and the clutch and the brake, or whatever your combination is going to be, and do different trials of how you should launch it effectively. In iRacing, there's a bit of a sort of cheat, I suppose, if you want just a fairly safe and relatively quick launch in most cars. You can actually just put your foot on the brake, don't use the clutch at all, engage first gear, and just wait until the lights go green, and when they go green, just go full throttle. Not many of the cars will wheel spin at that point because the engine bogs down so low, but you do get a fairly clean and very easy, so very consistent launch. If you want to go a bit more aggressive than that, you can do it like a real car, where you balance your foot on the clutch and the throttle, and you blend them both in and out, which I would recommend, but it can be a bit more risky because often you can come off the clutch a bit too quick and spin the back wheels. And if you want to get the ultimate start, then really you need a dual clutch system. You can see here I've just got a fairly old Logitech wheel, so I don't have that capability, but some of the newer Fanatec wheels or Simucube wheels, there's all the top end direct drive wheels generally come with 2 paddles as dual clutches, and you can set each of those with different different bite points, I should say. So make sure you practice your starts. The other thing is pit lanes. The pit exit, obviously you practice by default, where every time you come out of the pit lane, you do that and you practice it. Pit entry, it's very easy to forget about, because in iRacing, if you crash the car, or even if you spin or you've had enough and you're about to quit the session, you can just press escape and jump out. But make sure you practice that pit entry. They've all got speed limiters, and the speed limiter line you need to brake to get to, and you need to know what that braking point is. And in some pit lanes it's very late, and some pit lanes it's very early, so you need to make sure that you're ready for that, so you don't give away time in a pit stop, or worse still, get a penalty for speeding in the pit lane. Another instance that might come up is damage. Most of in fact all the official races have damage on, depending on hosted sessions. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off, but most of the time people have damage on. So if you do get a little bit of damage on your car, just to the front or rear wing in a single seater, or whatever it may be, a bit of bodywork damage in a GT car, it's worth knowing how it handles and how much time you're going to lose. Often a little bit of damage is worth still driving around with, versus the time it takes to come into the pit lane, slow down, get repaired and come back out again. So there are 2 things there you need to learn. One is learn how to drive the car with damage. I wouldn't recommend specifically going out to break the car and try and learn it, but when you do have a little off and nudge something and do a little bit of damage to the car, don't just immediately abandon to the pits. Just try it and see how severe it is. And the key thing to know is how long does it take you to do a pit stop. So versus a flying lap, how long does it take to come in, stop, probably do a fast repair, because you can't tell how long the repair is going to take otherwise, and then come back out. And if that costs you 30 seconds, then when you're racing and you can see that you might be 2 seconds a lap slower, but there's only 10 laps left, you're better off to just accept the time penalty on the track and just keep ploughing around. So you can be prepared by that. And they're probably the main things, at least for sprint racing. If you're getting into endurance racing, there's a couple of other things that you might want to try. How far you can go on fuel is a big thing. Particularly there are some VRS endurance races which I've started looking at. Typically they're 3-hour endurance races, and normally you get about an hour out of a fuel tank. So on some circuits you might get 59 minutes, in which case you run out of fuel before the end. On other tracks it might be an hour and 5 minutes, in which case your 2 stops will do you fine. So it's worth knowing how long you'll get out of a tank of fuel, and therefore if you need to do any fuel saving, and again if you do need to do fuel saving, how do you do it? Typically it's lifting and coasting at the end of the straights. So just literally lift off the throttle, coast into the braking zone, and then brake slightly later than you would have done before. And that period where you're not on the throttle saves a bit of fuel each lap, and it doesn't cost you too much lap time. So that's a good way of fuel saving if you need to. The best way of fuel saving, if you've got the opportunity, is to sit in someone's slipstream, and you can just save fuel by sitting in their slipstream and again effectively lifting off early at the end of the straight, and then you don't really lose any time at all. So yeah, be aware of how to fuel save, and if you need to fuel save if you're going into an endurance race. And the other thing is the tyres. In endurance races it often comes down to, do you change tyres every stint, or can you double stint or triple stint the tyres? And you can only really find that out by doing extended practice sessions of an hour or 2 hours and keeping the same tyres on to see what your pace does as you go through. So yeah, a couple of other things to look for there. Of course, racecraft is another big one. I won't get into that on this video. I think racecraft is a big enough topic to do completely separately, but when you are going into a race, it's worth knowing, if you can, have practiced fake overtaking moves beforehand, i.e. just driving down the inside of the track as if there was a car that you're overtaking, so you know kind of where you need to brake. It will be a bit earlier than if you're on your full racing line, but you don't know how much earlier until you've done it. So it's worth trying a few of these offline events in your own practice sessions, just so that you're not thrown a bit when you do come to a race and you're either on the inside of someone overtaking them, or if someone's come up the inside of you, can you hang around the outside, and you need to know sort of how much speed you can carry around the outside of the corner. But yeah, there's a whole nother video I think in Racecraft, so I won't go into that too much. I think I'll leave it there. Hopefully you found that interesting. I'm sure there's a million other things that I could have mentioned, so please add in the comments below what you think I should have mentioned, and if you've got any other requests for new topics. We started to get into the data on this one. I think that's a video again in itself. Car setup could be another one, and there's a few sort of lighter questions I keep getting about liveries and how do you do spec maps and things that I might throw a video together on that, all on the iRacing front. And of course, being middle of February, we're getting closer to the real race season, which, depending on the lockdown rules here in the UK, I'm hoping to get out in my actual car within a month or so. So I'm probably going to start putting some videos out on that as well, how I prep it for a track day or a test day, and yeah, how the car goes together, and I'll come up with a few ideas about that as well. So yeah, look out for more content. Hope you liked it. Please click on the video, click like, and do subscribe to my channels on here, on Twitch and Facebook and Instagram as well. If you want to get involved, we've got another JWR community race night coming up next weekend. So send us a message on any of those channels or get involved on Discord, and you can come and join us. Thanks guys, cheers, bye.